Hi, friends. Host Eric here. Host Talking with Fat People. I'm here with Beckie. Beckie Catchup. Her last name's Catchup. Her parents changed.
Planet.
Her parents changed their last name to Catchup because they were such big fans of ketchup. Anyway, regardless of Beckie's personal history and why her name's Catchup, she is somebody who introduced me to the concept or this school of therapy called internal family systems, and she suggested that it was something that for her helped her to grow successfully.
Yeah,
So
I adjusted my attachment style through it. So,
okay, so talk to me about, well, you were saying you began doing mental health work on yourself at a young age, yeah?
yeah, as young as like 14, maybe even younger. When I was like 10, I was doing public speeches on suicide and shit. So, like, very much in the forefront of my mind at a very young age, very interested in psychology. But throughout my journey, in therapy, I had tried many different forms of therapy. So I've tried DBT, dialectal behavioral therapy. I've tried cognitive behavioral therapy. I've tried many others as well, but the one that is the most prominent in terms of meaningfulness for me was internal family systems. I don't know if you want me to kind of give a little bit of an introduction as to what that concept is.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so essentially with internal family internal family systems, the concept is that you are not one you. Okay, so in to give you kind of an idea on how you can relate this to yourself, as many of you are probably healthy individuals, you have conversations with yourself in your head. You deliberate in your own mind. And so surely you've noticed that you'll have like some sort of back and forth with yourself. Well, this is possible because we have multiple parts within ourselves. So in internal family systems, we recognize one core self, and that core self is either met with compassion, acceptance, or curiosity. So in like another way to put it, if you're having thoughts within your mind or experiences within yourself that do not meet with compassion, curiosity, or acceptance, you're dealing with a part. And so to clarify on what a part is, essentially we have three different kinds of parts in as many different amounts of them per the individual. But those parts are exiles, managers, and firefighters. And so exiles are essentially childhood trauma wounds. There's not a single person on this earth that is without a childhood wound experience. And so the difference isn't whether or not we have them. The difference is whether or not we let go of them, we've healed from them, or whether we protected ourselves. So commonly with people who have poor attachment styles, either anxious, avoidant, or worst case scenario, anxious avoidant, what happens is you have these parts called managers and firefighters that are essentially protecting your childhood wound from re-experiencing that pain. So rather than processing pain as it occurred when you were a kid, you needed to rely on someone outside of yourself to protect yourself. If you were a toddler running around in the woods, you would die. Like you would starve, you would go through drought, you would die. So anyway, essentially what happens is the brain creates these parts protect the childhood wounds because the child didn't have, in these circumstances, a parent to take care of them. So in a healthy individual, these managers and firefighters are going to kind of look like this. The managers are going to say something like, "You're lazy shit, get out of bed." Or they're going to say, that person doesn't have your best interest, you should probably disregard that. The firefighters in a healthy individual are going to say, "You deserve those beers with dinner, you had a hard day worth of work, you can escape a bit." Okay, and this is perfectly normal for many people. Now, when we're dealing with someone who doesn't have a stable mind, what we have instead is firefighters that say, "Go and do these copious amounts of drugs, binge eat, go have copious amounts of sex, don't consider," like basically escape, escape, escape. Like firefighters, they're trying to disassociate you away from your pain. They're trying to save you from their pain. So they have a very, strong purpose, and they actually care about you. Now, the managers in an unhealthy person are going to look more like this. They're going to be, telling you you're a lazy fat piece of shit. No one cares about you. Look at all the opportunities you missed. Look at all the failures. Essentially, they defeat you. They try to manage you. They try to micromanage you. Now, in a healthy person, we look at internal family systems like a car. The core self is in the driver's seat. They're the ones, yourself, right? Curious, compassionate, and accepting. And occasionally you'll get a little nudge from one of the other people in the car, and they'll say, "Hey, look at that direction instead." And that works for people. And that's how we keep on top of our shit. That's how some people have really good SI. Like that's perfectly fine and normal for everyone. What's abnormal is when you have suppressed your pains, denied yourself from healing for so long due to necessity. Like, let's not take this away. This isn't someone that doesn't know how to take care of themselves necessarily. This is someone who wasn't taught by their parents how to. So anyway, what will happen for them is their managers and their firefighters will want the driver's seat. So essentially what they're doing is they're getting in the way. They're taking away the room for compassion, curiosity, and acceptance. And they're trying to protect you from perceived fears that aren't indicative through reality. They're past tense fears. So people with strong SI are probably more prone to this than other people, I would say. So with that said, IFS basically takes the concept of this car and says, we accept the reality that these managers and firefighters and exiles, quite frankly, are going to exist. They have existed, they do exist. We're not going to take the therapeutic approach of a doctor's opinion on how to make you better. We're going to address the inner versions of you and find out what you want to be better. And the phenomena that occurs when this happens is that the individual in therapy has a tendency to actually respond to this with answers from their own psyche about what it is they need. Sometimes there will be like a conflicting manager or a conflicting firefighter that will therefore kind of argue with each other. And then the therapist would notice that the person isn't being compassionate, acceptive, or curious, and, regard that there's another part there. And so sometimes it's an unweaving process of addressing conflicting parts. But essentially the goal of this form of therapy is to have the individual become their own parent. That's why the concept is internal family system, right? You become your own parent. You acknowledge the pains from your childhood, and you promise in a meaningful way to your managers and firefighters that you are going to protect those childhood wounds, that when you need physical comfort, you'll physically hold yourself. And that'll vary from person to person what the actual need is based on what they didn't have when they were younger. But essentially, you're just learning your own needs on the inside, addressing them, and becoming a more confident individual as your other parts learn to trust you. That whole concept of being your own biggest critic is certainly true. And I feel like that's another concept that they kind of pulled into internal family systems. So that's kind of like
that was absolutely spectacular. You really laid it all out there and did it in a way that was pretty well structured and everything too. So I mean, that was great summary of everything. So it's odd when we talk about exiles, and you're saying everybody on the planet has some sort of childhood trauma, but sometimes people to varying degrees either let go of it or don't.
They were taught coping mechanisms in childhood, right? So if you had a parent that was structured within a healthy attachment style, then they taught you that attachment style. So you learned to navigate through this. But if you weren't led by a parent, let's say, and you felt like you were your own parent, I know some children that felt that they were their parents' at a young age. At that point, you're only using the skills that are available to you. And as we all know, your frontal cortex isn't even developed at that point. You don't have skills. So It's not like anyone was set up for failure. It's just the cards that they were dealt, and learning to forgive that reality, and also learning to take ownership and responsibility for it. Because once we're an adult, you can't look back and say, oh, but childhood me this or that, right? You have to accept that was the past, it happened, and now you are in control, which a lot of people who suffer from this don't actually believe. They think that everyone else is in control and they're the only ones without control.
Well, one thing that I really like about this is that it doesn't make very many claims about the parts, for example. It doesn't say, here's what they are, here's how many they are. In fact, it says specifically there's an indeterminate number of parts.
Yes.
And it doesn't care conceptually about why or how things are, or whether it's even describing things accurately. It only cares about how this model impacts communicative interactions between people, basically, and within people, people. And it's concerned about outcomes. It's got a clear criterion of what comprises a good outcome. A good outcome is acceptance, curiosity, or compassion. And anything else is a part imposing its will upon the self rather than serving the self.
Absolutely. And we actually see that in interacting with other people where you're like, I know this person cares about me. I know they love me even. Why are they behaving in this manner that kind of, conflicts that understanding? And it's because they within themselves are conflicted and they need to process that on their own before anyone else can give them a hand. It's definitely begins with the self. And that's something I really like too, is that, like I said, a decade plus worth of therapy. This was the only therapy that someone didn't lead me. I was
Okay.
asking my own questions and visualizing. I was coming up with my own solutions. And that is so much more effective than, buying into someone else's concept.
All right, and so that also indicates to me some area where I've been just banging my head against the wall for no reason, which is I keep trying to direct Kimberly towards solutions,
You
but
can't.
that's not going to work.
Mm-mm.
And if she is empowered safely to do work on the self, then obviously that's going to be a much more effective.
I have some really good TE for you.
Mm.
Your best bet in times of conflict is to recognize that she's fighting herself and not you. And as soon as that revelation occurs in your mind, it's time to make her sit back, reduce her anxiety, whether it's you physically holding her or regarding her to hold herself. Like to literally hug yourself, because the first step that someone would need in that scenario is to unravel the distrust. And when we're trying to see who's right and wrong, there's defenses up on either side. If we can eradicate that,
There's
even
not
for a
on
moment,
mine. There are not defenses up on my side, for Christ's sakes. I don't know how many times I gotta fucking say this. When
well,
I am trying to figure out who's right and wrong with Kimberly, I am erring on the side of her winning all the time.
allow me to clarify. Allow me to clarify. The defense that I perceive is the little piece inside your head that says she maybe won't see what I'm saying. That's the defense. It doesn't have to be something that's, over the top. It doesn't have to be something that's negative. It's just a defense.
Okay, well that's true. You're right that I do. I am guilty often of what you'd call a, what's it called? It's attribution bias. That because she's behaving in this given way, she intends to behave in this given way and intends the outcome of her behaving in this given way, and is therefore malicious in some capacity, but that's not actually the case.
No, and you're missing an integral piece to that cycle, right? After she behaves in the manner that she does and rewinds, like calms back down to her central point, she probably deals with a lot of internal conflict of guilt in how she behaved.
But she never
It
expresses
probably,
any of that to me. See,
well, because expressing it to you could be putting it in your head and creating the reality there. Imagine if one sits to themselves and says, oh, I really fucked up. My partner's going to love me less than I was loved before. I already don't believe I'm lovable. If I address to them and I'm wrong, what if I've now implanted the seed in their mind to justify their dislove for me? Now, that might sound completely irrational to you, but to the person who has a weakened or undeveloped attachment style, that's a very real possibility.
okay. Well, I mean, the thing is, what the message I try to convey to Kimberly is that I I naturally can and will love her more and better when she is vulnerable with me than I will love somebody who tries to be mistake free all the time in some capacity.
Yes, and that's very fair. But how that's internalized is, I will love you if you change. But you in this moment right now are not lovable. Again, it's not about what rationally is consistent.
Keep in
over
mind,
time.
I'm never telling her anything other than words like, you need to remember, Kimberly, that I love you even when I'm mad at you.
But now imagine when she doesn't believe her own worth in her own head, let's say, and you say that, it's a challenge within her own self-beliefs. You're talking to a part, not talking to her. If you were talking to her, you would be met with acceptance, curiosity, or compassion. When you're not met with those things, that's when you, as the outside source, are now aware that you're not talking to the woman that you're in a relationship. You're talking with one of the protectors inside of her head. And it's getting that protector to trust that she can maneuver herself through the scenario that's going to get that to unwind. Now, that begins with her. That's not something that you can just will for her. She has to first recognize that parts exist, accept that reality in herself, and then from there say, I've got you. What message are you telling me when I feel this intense emotion? What is the purpose behind the emotion? And if it's not necessarily a straight emotion, if FI is an issue and it's just, like you can't conceptualize where it's coming from, then it's, okay, what physicality do I need right now? Do I need to hold myself? Do I need to express something that's completely irrelevant from what we're talking about to get it on the table because it's in the back of my mind and affecting this conversation? Those are things she needs to do on her own. And quite frankly, if she's already in therapy, she's got some sort of interest in figuring that out. I'm sure she would do very well with it.
What did I type you as?
We left with like an ENFP Schema. And then a lot of people saw a lot of T in me on the page. Someone said I was an ESFP. I don't think I'm an
You're
ESFP.
not an ESFP. Oh, fuck no. There's no chance in hell.
But I was really stoned too, and like that definitely, like I lose some IQ when I smoke. Yeah.
I mean, you're really well spoken, and the NE is very like palpable, And the thing is, you're a good indication right here in talking to you about this stuff of how it can be. I don't know what type you are for sure. I've not formally typed you or anything.
For sure.
But it can be difficult to distinguish ENFP and ENTP sometimes because depending on the subject matter and how they're going about talking about it and stuff, you might. Like I said, I haven't formally tested you, so you might actually be an ENTP. I don't know, but.
My running joke is that given my father's an ENTP and my mother's an INFP, I'm just the elusive ENXP. Because it's always coming to. No, most people who know me personally, it's a debate between ENFP and ENTP. It's not really ever been anything else. The outside world seems to jump to all these other conclusions I've never heard. But anyway, I just kind of settle down with
I still think you're an ENFP, I think. But the thing is, why is it that I don't really feel like I have quote unquote exiles? That is to say, I can think of childhood events that were traumatic, but
because you tended to them. Okay. They're not buried. They're not suppressed by your firefighters and by your managers. If you've tended to them as you were taught through a healthy attachment styled parent, then they still exist. You can remember what happened. And you might even for a moment, probably not with FI polar, but you might even for a moment have some sort of physical sensation as you remember that. But you're able to move on from it. It doesn't take over your day. And also you probably recognize when the memory occurs, where for most of us who have to go through IFS, we don't even recognize where the memory is. We just feel triggered. We don't know where it's coming from. So it's unwinding and saying, hey, I'm going to unravel myself and I'm going to get a greater understanding as to where this even came from in the first place, recognize it doesn't relate to the reality I'm in, and then be a little more forgiving to the outside people because this happened to me before. And it's my responsibility to not let my before affect my now. It's no one else's.
The thing is, I do have memories that trigger strong physical responses from me. They're almost always memories of instances where I socially failed and am embarrassed, and I feel a great deal of shame.
My life. Grade 3, man. Grade 3 comes to haunt me all the fucking time. But so the question at that point is, when you have that feeling or that sensation, let's say, is it associated or followed by, I want to take a bong hit, or I'm going to go get some food, or something along that nature?
No.
Or do you hear, fuck man, you should have done it like this?
I say shame and anxiety. And I just, move on. I don't know.
So you probably have, in that way, a more robust relationship with your firefighters and managers in that they work together, right? Because the one is acknowledging, the manager's going, oh, shame and anxiety. And then the firefighter's the one that's giving you permission to move on, right? And again, that's the equivalent of having them in their assigned seats and just giving you a little bit of help with the navigation. It's when you don't have that anymore, when you've gone on repressing for so long that your body doesn't trust you to be the one to save it. That's when these firefighters and managers go, we're above the core self. We run the show, because the core self is no longer directing in the common goal of all parts.
See, so I actually think my firefighter, I think, does a great job because, for example, when I'm really pissed at Kimberly, what I'll do is I'll go play poker, which maybe I'll lose $40 or $80, whatever,
But it's a healthy 40 or 80 because it's worth enjoyment. Right?
It's something that's indulgent, that's not a bad thing for me to do because I don't have a problem with gambling. I don't gamble very much. And
So,
it's also like me only and not Kimberly caring about, you know.
and I also perceive that for you, you probably still feel like your firefighters and your managers are more akin to your core self. Where for a person who's completely unraveled, has these different parts conflicting within them, they can really recognize the separation inside of themselves. Where a person who's more healthy can see these parts as just kind of like gradient versions of themselves that still ultimately are sewn into the core.
Yeah, I mean, I do see it as I've not really viewed myself as having. I've never heard the terms before, so but I've never viewed myself as having usually different parts per se. In fact, I've always in my head though used a collective first person pronoun, like we or us. Come on, guys, let's go.
That's
What
because you're unified.
when I'm
That's
walking
because
around and it's like doing stuff like, what should we do now? Let's go over to the
yeah.
do this. You know.
So another way to put it would be this is where the basis of IFS. I don't know if you actually found the originator's work, but so the basis behind IFS was a family therapist. And so he would have group sessions with a family and he would notice these archetypes. So you have the black sheep child, the middle child, like the scapegoat, you have the golden child, you have the parent that's nice, and you have the parent that's strict, all of these different pieces, right? And so when you're in a family session as a group, the goal is to make sure that each individual and their archetype is heard, unifying them to be a central point of the unit as opposed to one of the branches. And so he took that understanding and just attempted one day to address that inside of a person. And to his surprise, the person could answer him directly. And with each session with that first individual, they got better and better at recognizing their own concepts inside of them. They no longer needed that pulling from him where he's probing. And so that's when he realized that we actually are built with the tools inside of us to solve these, mental health issues. Of course, there's room for change, like bipolar, things like that. There are chemical issues that would need a little bit of extra help. But for the most part, with regards to attachment styles and childhood trauma and such, it's all within you. You just have to have the patience, the energy, the compassion, the curiosity, and the acceptance to seek it.
That's remarkable. So yeah, I think that this is an example in general of TE directed well because it's about the outcome.
Yes.
And the theory it's not really even a theory. It's like a set of rhetorical tools that acknowledges that's what it is, you know?
One of the backwards things with most therapies that it contrasts this one is that they have a tendency to reopen old wounds and cause an individual to re-experience that trauma. But for a second, if we think, it's not necessarily true that a person has the capacity to deal with their own worst childhood trauma. So like to give you kind of like a visual, imagine a person's threshold, and this will relate to what I was saying when I said 8 on 10 stress in the group chat last night. Imagine a person's threshold is a thermometer. And so a healthy person's thermometer throughout the day slowly rises. You get hit by a puddle from a car, it goes up 1. Someone's an asshole to you at work, it goes up 1. You go home, you smoke your joint, it goes to 0 again, recycle, repeat. Now, imagine a person who doesn't know how to deal with their own emotions. They don't even know how to address them. So what's happening instead is their thermometer is constantly going up and they don't know how to check in to make it go down. They just don't know how. And sometimes they might through SI if they have that, but not necessarily always, because it's not a conscious choice when they're engaging SI to make the thermometer go down. They're probably not aware. So what happens is eventually a person gets stuck where it's kind of like a coagulated state of mercury where their stress level is no longer going down to the baseline 0. Instead, they're staying at a 7 or 8. So for a person like this, who's quick to go up to a 10, going to their most severe trauma is not going to help them. They're going to disassociate. Their parts are going to get defensive. They're not going to make any sort of change. So rather than focusing on what the therapist's individual ideal of what a person's healing should look like, this therapy says, okay, we're going to let your own mind travel down its own road and figure out what it needs to know. Let's not assume that it needs to go to your rape. Let's not assume that it needs to go to being, beaten the fuck up as a kid. Let's assume that inside of you what is the first step. And through doing that, we're not creating these barriers where the person is like, I don't fucking know you and I'm telling you my whole life. What the fuck? You're only saying as much as you're comfortable for. And a lot of the times it's through meditation where rather than just expressing it, you're also observing your thoughts as they occur. So you're literally being told through a dialect in your own head what it is that's going on. And I really like that concept. Like you said, it's that very TE approach where they're not assuming what the right way to go about it is. They're just assuming that if you are open to listening to yourself, you'll find it.
Yeah, and I think, my main takeaway from this is that I need to remember that I don't know how Kimberly can solve this problem. Kimberly knows how Kimberly can solve this problem. And the big problem that's gotten in the way of solvency thus far is that I keep trying to explain to her what the problem is so that she can understand it better. But that's bad TE, right? That's terrible TE. What I should do instead is provide as best I can an environment and a frame in which she can find the answers within herself safely, and it seems like this set of rhetorical tools would be the best one to use to do that, because it specifically starts with the notion that I don't have the answers for you.
The most important thing as an individual, Eric, from like my speculation from watching you over time, that would be best for you to keep into consideration is that with your polar FI, when you try to do these things, it's going to be an approach of TI, FE, and some TE, right? And not even great TE. So you're going to be coming from what you think makes
very
the
generous.
most logical.
That's very generous of you. Not great TE.
It's true. It's true. You can't be harsh on yourself for not, because it's logically what you're saying makes sense. Unfortunately, we're not looking within the framework of logic, right? Like it's completely irrational. This whole subject is irrational. But that's what.
And see, this is my protector, I think, coming in when I go, okay, you've got to communicate with me. And that means, I need you to basically have a conversation in which you're displaying that you're not traumatized, that you have trust.
Because that makes you feel safe to trust yourself. Otherwise, you're like, how can I trust in a rational scenario? It doesn't fit within my framework.
Right. Well, I'm just like, okay, I have to have some boundaries here, and I'm being an emotional trash can at this point. And, I heard that term this morning for the first time, and I thought, oh, that's what I'm objecting to, basically. Because her firefighter is not drugs and alcohol, not binge sex, not overeating, anything like that.
You love all those, right?
Yeah, right. It's project her hurt into anger onto me.
So literally, like, to ball it like a fucking like a snowball or like a baseball and just whip it outside of herself.
Right, because like yesterday, for example, she got really mad at me because of this conversation I had with Delilah, in which I encouraged Delilah I told her she needed to come on Sunday because my dad's leaving for a trip and the family's taking care of Mom, And Dad's of the mindset that Delilah really needs to be in the mix here because, we need all people chipping in. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be that difficult. I take care of my mom all the time, whatever. But I want to make sure my dad feels reassured, so I want Delilah there. I want the whole family there, et cetera. Sure. And I told Delilah, look, if you can show up on Sunday and just say, yes, I'm going to be there doing this, doing that, I probably won't ask
You're not
much.
Obligated.
I'm not really going to ask much help of you during the week. Don't worry about it. But just be there for the Sunday and make sure Dad's happy,
Yeah.
Kimberly got very angry at me about this and insisting that I'm not being fair, that I'm showing Delilah preferential treatment or something. And basically she's reliving her childhood where her sister, she's feelings about her and her sister, It's like it has nothing to do with what's going on.
So there's a possibility that she wants less responsibility in that engagement herself.
That's not the case. I offered that to her right away. I said, listen, Kim, I don't really need your help here. I'm not going to ask much of you either. And that didn't matter at all.
Once the teen is experienced, the defense is up. So even if it's true, you're not going to hear that. Here's my example, okay? Like from my own personal life. So when I was a kid, when I'd get upset, Now, I did a lot of ecstasy, so my emotions were all over the place. But when I was upset, I would beat them all, and I would just go and sit in the fucking corner and sulk. And like my friends would be like, we're gonna go have fun, we're gonna go do more drugs, whatever, and like ignore me. And so I'd have like a boyfriend come up to me and be like, do you need a hug? And you know what? Through therapy this year, not 10 years ago, I learned, yeah, I did need a fucking hug. But my vulnerability was so high already that I couldn't accept the hug from the outside, knowing full well that it would do some good for me. I didn't realize how much back then that I do now. But at the time, it didn't even matter if I could, because I was so defensive and saying basically to receive that hug from the external world, to not be able to solve this problem myself, I am weak. I am all these different things that my managers are telling me I am, that reinstill a negative perception of myself. So perhaps when she's already reached that point in her head, and to let you know, because I do have complex trauma, right? PTSD's flashbacks do not necessarily occur with visuals. They don't necessarily occur with a thought. They occur with an emotion. If you have an intense, extreme emotion and you have no understanding where it came from, you can't shake it, you are triggered. You are in a flashback. That's a lot of people think of PTSD as just, you go to war, you have some shit happen, you come back, and then you see the war. No, that's like the sensationalized version. PTSD is literally like, I'm outside, I see a squirrel and I want to cry. And I'm like, why is the squirrel making me want to cry? But it's not the squirrel. It's the, it could be the essence or the impression that the squirrel gave my mind that I'm not even consciously aware of. And that's why it's so complex. And that's why it needs a lot of compassion and empathy, right? It's because the individual themselves, in that sense, is so irrational that they can't even see what it is that caused that emotion. And if you can't see what caused the emotion, surely you can't provide the outcome to it.
Interestingly, though, I totally identify with that idea that you can have an emotion all of a sudden, like see a squirrel and start getting emotional and have no idea why you're emotional. I experience that all the time. But the thing is, I don't think it has anything to do with, I don't think it has anything to do with PTSD. I think it just has to do with that bipolar. Yeah.
And when you're a person who has that bipolar, then there's a reason there. But when you're not a person who can identify as having that bipolar, then what is the reason, right? At that point, you can't say that it's necessarily the same thing.
And it's also a matter of the fact that those bursts of emotions are not causing non-optimal functioning in me at all. It's not It's not causing any problems. So
you might even enjoy them because you're like, I feel more alive than I did.
I do enjoy them. I got to admit that I enjoy the moisture. It's like I enjoy bursting. Like when you were talking earlier, there was a part when you were talking when I was getting really moist and my eyes were starting to fill up with moisture.
Crying to commercials. I don't have cable anymore. I use an IPTV. But when I had cable, a father touched the son's shoulder and I am fucking bawling. I have no idea why, but I'm bawling. It's there,
Certain commercials will make me cry too. But they
never tell me though.
What's that?
I don't go out and buy the thing. I just cry a bit. I'm like, thank you. You paid to make me cry. Good job.
But like sometimes things that'll make me cry that it just makes no sense at all. Like there'll be a funny commercial, and then after it's over, I'll have laughed and I'll go, "That was a funny commercial." I get all. I like that there are funny commercials.
Maybe that's something to do with our SI seeking.
Maybe yeah.
We can't grasp what the impression is, and we'll NE to shit, so we'll never actually figure it out. We're ignoring our NI. We don't know. Right. But it's there, and it's experienced, and that's enough.
Well, I talk about ignoring NI. That's what I've been displaying for the vast majority of this relationship in general on a lot of different things. It's like, because for most of the first year or so of it, I took what she was saying more or less at face value. And so I was constantly trying to fix things in myself or adjust things that I was doing wrong and trying to make sense of this logic that she was providing to me. And eventually I realized these things she's saying are just delusional. It's like I'm not...
They're tics. They're an appeal of her own mind to try to reduce the negative experience. But the issue is, until she knows what is causing the negative experience, nothing will work. Which means that you get more desperate with each one and you become more louder and you fight it harder. But the thing is, it's like processing emotion, which is the concept that people who need IFS truly missed. In processing your emotions, you experience them in whatever way you do as an individual, and you release them. right? For a person with IFS who requires IFS, they don't know how to process the emotion. The firefighters are getting in the way, the managers are getting in the way, and they're not actually seeing it compassionately or curiously. So for that reason, they're not going to come to their own calming. They're not going to move away from that. They're going to constantly be fighting for it more and more. And the more you resist, the more agonizing the experience is. It's through acceptance that we're able to channel it and process it, right? Like, think of a breakup. The more you're saying, oh, I don't give a fuck about that person, they didn't matter to me, the more you fight it, the worse it gets. And I think that's the worst with us, with that now ignoring, is to, know deep down you give a shit and be like, no, I don't. But anyway, once you start accepting that thing, you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad. Once you start listening to sad music, let's say, like, that's something that my roommate would do, is he would get in a breakup with like a long-term partner, and he'd just sit in his room for 2 days listening to sad music. He'd come out after the 2 days, big smile on his face, his studies are better than ever, because he gave that time. But if you don't know how to give yourself that time, and you don't know what your version of that time looks like, right, because that's usually the problem. It's not that you don't want to help yourself, it's that you don't know how. And so again, it's just the cycle. So the most important piece, I think, that comes from this, especially maybe as it relates to Kimberly, because I see a lot of similarities between us, and I have an ISFJ sister, so like I think that comes from it too, is that she needs to see IFS as the plan, her plan that's going to become a part of her ontological routine. She can say, oh, I recognize, like, sorry, I'll give you another example through my IFS journey. I didn't know that I didn't have a sense of boundaries. I am so not physical in my experience that I don't feel when someone's coming too close to me type deal. I don't understand that. So my therapist, what she did was she brought me into this conference room and she said, okay, you look at this wall and I'm going to walk around. And as she walked around different parts, she would say, how do you feel? I'd be like, I don't fucking know. Like, you're walking in a room. And she'd be like, no, do you have a physical sensation inside of you? And so my answer, to this day, I don't know if I was guessing or if it was true, to be honest, but I was like, oh, I feel something in my knee. And she's like, okay, so you have stress in your knee. And the closer she got to me, like at one point she was behind me and I couldn't see her. And so to me, that's a huge boundary breach, as I've learned. And so at that point, I could feel something in my throat and I could feel something in my knee. And prior to this experience, I had never had anything similar. And so my point is, she was trying to show me that your body sends you signals to let you know when your stress levels are rising. But if you don't even know how to tap into your own body and you don't know how to experience that, then you don't know as they raise. And so by the time they're fully risen, you're fucked. So if she can have like an ontological routine where she says, oh, fuck, I feel something in my throat. That's not a cold. What is that? Do I need to hug myself right now? Do I need to take a step out of another room and just think or feel or whatever it is for that individual? They can do that. And again, through doing that every day, whenever it's required, it becomes an ontological routine. I'm trying to like push this for the ISFJ, right? They can then start to see it as a part of themselves. And that, without IFS, I would imagine, would start to help them sew back the parts into being one unit. So hopefully her therapist does IFS. That would be the best case.
I don't think she does, but I'm not sure.
There's another therapy too, by the way, that in, like, just researching it is really, really useful in conjunction, because like I can't say that it was all IFS for me. I've researched so many. I'm sure that I've picked up some along the way, but is schema theory. Schema theory basically states, if you're unfamiliar with it, that different people learn maladaptive coping skills as a result of not having someone teach them the way, and through that they end up believing certain realities, certain predispositions in the world that aren't necessarily true. And so, like, I have an alienation schema. What that means is I have a tendency to see myself as a martyr. And it means that when I'm socializing with people, I feel as close to them as they show me I'm close to them. When I walk away from that group, if I'm not in communication with that group for a week, I don't feel close to them anymore.
Let me interrupt here. This is something that I've read, and when I was researching stuff myself, that about people who have attachment style issues, is that they experience neutral emotions as negative, and positive emotions as positive, and negative emotions as negative. So it's like if I'm not actively showing Kimberly in the moment that I'm feeling positive about her, she assumes I'm feeling negative about her.
Yeah. It's like a dopamine high rush and seeking it constantly. So if you don't feel dopamine inside of you, you feel empty. And when you feel empty, you don't feel like you're like whole. And because you don't feel whole, therefore, again, it goes back to I feel empty. And if I'm empty and most of what I'm getting, especially for FE users, is coming from the outside, then I logically deduce that I'm feeling empty because of the outside.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's coming to accepting that, yes, if you're an FE user, a lot of what you feel about yourself is going to be dependent on your groups. Sure. In that way, you align your groups to make you feel good. Don't surround yourself with people that treat you like shit. But every individual, even the FI polar, should understand that your internal feelings have a weight. They have a precedence. They deserve their rightful place. And that's as far as you can use them, right? So the TI polar or FI polar should be kind to themselves if that's something very difficult for them. Just their pursuance of it is something to be credited. But the person in general should give some weight to this, because it's in ignoring it that we result in these sorts of issues.
See, I don't think that Kimberly ignores her feelings at all. In fact, one of the things that happens a lot is, I'll say, well, can you just agree with me that, yeah, anything? And she'll say, I don't agree with you because I know what my feelings are on this. And so in that case, I'm just,
But here's the thing, right? Again, if your conscious stack is a TI-FE sort of scenario and you're talking about your internal feelings, you're probably still associating it to an internal logical framework. You're not TEing it, which is where, that's, if you're going to use a logical function with your internal feelings, it should be TE as best as you can. Why? Because through trying to find a solution to your feelings, you have a purpose in giving them weight and attention. But if you're just trying to confirm that your feelings are right, a subjective thing, you're not going to get anywhere.
That's true.
Your feelings are valid and they deserve to be heard.
That's both true and very insightful.
They have a beginning and an end, of relativity. And it's accepting that as long as someone is willing to respect that you have autonomous right towards your feelings, that should be logically enough. That should be the most logic you put into your feelings as it relates to other people. Unless you're problem solving in your own head.
Well, see, this is one area where sometimes we make communicative progress is when I say to her, I go, okay, I understand those are your feelings. They're very strong. I validate your feelings. They are valid. And my feelings are also strong here, and they are also valid. So now we're at an impasse. That's why that will sometimes make some progress.
And a step further would be to give her an example of which aspect of her feeling is valid. And I know that's hard. Again, you're coming from a logical framework, so you might start to, especially as an any dom, equivocate whether it is valid. But if you show you're trying that, and if you're even like, look, I'm not good at this, but I really want you to understand how truly I give credit to your values and your feelings, I'm going to try to elaborate on what I agree with.
I mean, the thing is, I do that all the time. I do that all the time. I try to demonstrate the behavior I want her to display.
I think as any DOMs, we have this tendency to go, okay, I have an outcome, but I have no idea how I want to get there because there's this spider web of different shit that I could put into it. So I'm going to tell you my goal and purpose first, and then I'm going to elaborate, right? And that seems to work for me from time to time. But sometimes I find that also will immediately put the other person's defenses up, especially if they're not as good at any as me, because then they're like expecting me to like run them over and confuse them. So they're like prepared with the punches that I don't want. So then I have to go, did what I say offend you? Was it my tone? Was it my choice of language? Which aspect was, abrasive to you? Because my goal here was to solve something for mutual benefit.
I mean, but the other thing to remember is I'm a human being too. And
exactly.
I have limited capacity or limited willingness, I guess you'd say, to completely be to turn the other cheek all the time. It's
not willingness, it's capacity. You were right the first time. You have a difficulty in doing that because you don't know how to give your own your own feelings weight internally in that matter, in like a truly FI way. So how can you, to expect that of you, Eric, just to be quite clear, is to set you up for failure. And so something that she needs to predetermine in her own ontology and also her own understanding of you, through experiences she could surely deduce this, is that it's not that you don't want to. It's not a lack of willingness. It's a lack of capacity. And that is going to be a part of the compromise of accepting the relationship. She had some damage. You're going to do what you know how to help her with that, but you have limitations, and what you do cannot take over your ontology. You have to remain autonomous. You have to keep your agency. You have to worry about yourself first, because the second you start worrying about someone else before yourself, who's worrying about you?
Right.
And that's the first thing any therapist will say with a couple in a room. They'll say, who do you put first? And usually an unhealthy couple will go, this guy. And then the therapist says, that's your first fucking mistake.
Yeah, I would answer that question. You know,
yeah,
well, you know, I would probably try to hedge and answer it by saying, well, in matters of the relationship, I put the relationship first. And the therapist probably wouldn't like that answer.
No, the therapist would say, we're not talking about a group concept here. We're talking about two individuals trying to coexist. The group is the aftermath.
Okay, well, I mean, I put myself first healthily. You
Good.
know, I would like to think I do, because I mean, the thing is, what that means simply is accepting the reality that no matter how deeply bonded a couple gets, and no matter how good a relationship is, at the end of the day, everybody is an individual and fundamentally, physically alone.
Yes, we are born alone and we die alone. It is just the way it works.
Mm-hmm. And what I mean by physically alone is there's always only one entity that is occupying a given body. And there's, you know, the closest you can get to not being physically alone is during the act of sex. But other than that, you are fundamentally a distinct object in space. So you just have to deal with that reality. And you got agency, like you said, and so you got to make sure that you take advantage of that. And you know, it's one of the things that can sometimes frustrate me is I have a limited amount of time and attention to direct to things, and I want to do a lot of productive activities, make videos and such or whatever. And I have no problem directing plenty of attention towards the relationship as well. But I don't want my whole life to be comprised of troubleshooting, you know? I want things to go smoothly.
So kind of what I see here, though, to your credit, is I feel that you use your NE to try to resolve this for her. Just in researching all night IFS, you're looking at all of the different possible ways to go through this process, and you're trying to figure out which one is the most effective for her. And in doing so, you're also trying to use your TE, right? So you're going beyond just the conscious level of simplicity to try to solve this for her. And given your type's combination, like, that's as you should, right? Now, she does something for you as well, which is the tending to the SI. I know that you give her credit for that in many of your videos, and that's great. The issue that's happening for you is in part of that exchange of NE for SI, you're expecting to get the strength of SI, right? As a seeking SI function, we know it, we accept it, we experience it, but we're not good at it. Especially the tending pieces like routine, order, structure, those sorts of parts, right? Your physical ontology, the safety of that. Now, in her ontology as an SI Dom exists her attention style, her attachment style. And so you as an SI seeking are seeking someone that's good at SI. But as we know, as SI seekers, SI is a fucking hard thing to have. Imagine 90% of your existence being the thing that we're great at ignoring. Imagine how difficult that would be to always have a list of things that need to be done and multiple of them and filing cabinets that are open all the time and closing. Like, that would be fucking awful. So for her, once she is able to remove this attachment style piece from her ontology, remove and accept that, yes, the shit that happened in the past happened, but it's not now. I'm in the best version of myself and I have the most control. Because for her, that's going to be important, right? The control part. If she can get to that piece, Eric, and she can heal that part of herself, you're going to start to see the exchange process that you seek for in your dual. Because that's the missing link. And that's probably why it gets confusing for you, where you're like, okay, I am my own person. I deserve to have certain things and I deserve to not experience other things. And I'm conflicted as to where I sit. And I don't want to listen to my NI because my NI is telling me something I don't actually want to hear, right? That's because she has this issue in her own ontology, and her ontology is what you're seeking from her. Had she have had a healthy attachment style, take away this one thing, this one commonality across arguments, Are you not in paradise?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's accepting that it's not actually her. It's a piece of her ontology, which makes it really seem like it's her. Logically, one would deduce that part of your ontology is part of you. But when we're looking at this in this metaphysical way, when we're looking at it as a versional, who knows how many parts she has in regards to firefighters and managers based on her experiences, because one would say that I assume, I could be incorrect, but I assume that there's probably at least one manager and one firefighter per exile. So it's addressing all of the individual exiles of trauma. And if she can do that, and if she can express that to you, the thing that I felt that really helped me with my relationship was coming home from my therapy and then restating what I learned. But maybe that's because I'm an any dom and I really needed to be able to take it in by saying it out loud.
Well, regardless, Beckie, that's just very right on the money. Everything you're saying is fucking super insightful. Well said as well. My takeaway from this whole thing is that I'm convinced that once again, NE can kick NI's ass. NI has told me probably from fairly early on, and I have steadfastly ignored it. I'm assuming. I don't really remember actively ignoring it, but that I should leave this relationship. That this person is damaged, and that it's too difficult and unnecessarily difficult. And but here's the thing: what you're saying is true. That if she can heal this thing that's preventing her from being her with me, then I'd be in paradise. Because even with the damage, there's so much about my current life and her and the situation and the way she interacts with the channel and everything like that that is as close to perfect as I could possibly imagine.
And I bet not the argumentative states, but some of that damage can sometimes be seen as sexy. Now, I'm not talking about the most severe of traumas. That's disgusting. But what I am talking about is the dark sense of humor one can get from experiencing the world. That attitude that one can have where they can be playful and not get lost in, oh, that's terrible. Why would you say that? They're like, that's true. That's true. There are aspects to be enjoyed from it as well, which tend to remain outside of the treatment. Now, something that I think will give you hope is to know that, statistically speaking, first off, IFS has been shown to treat elements of trauma in as little as 20 sessions, which cannot be said for many other forms of therapy. Okay, so that's something that they have analyzed, and they have therefore recognized it as a very good form of therapy. Secondly, I was only in IFS from September through to November, and then I did not like my therapist, so I left. But I took what I needed from it, is my point. I had a session every week for 3 months. And the point I'm trying to get to is that the understanding I have now and the neuroticism I experienced before then is extreme. The difference is extreme. And I think that comes from that SINE combo wherever you have it in the stack. Because you start making these other connections and you start associating some of them with your ontology. And again, that creates that ontological routine where before you didn't know what anger felt like before it was coming out of your mouth, you start to find physical sensations and you tend to them. And for an SI Dom, I imagine that'll be much easier than it was for me. She probably already knows what they feel like, just doesn't know how to tend to them.
Okay, so let me wrap this video up by just saying that there's a lot of food for thought here, and I'm so much so that I'm struggling to control all the extroverted intuition with it's just like I can't even begin to articulate the spread of things yet. So let me
That's right, though. You have it filmed.
I will articulate the following, which is I think this thing shows the same thing that cognitive function shows, which is that rhetorical tools can be very powerful things, and
yes.
that TE DOMs ought to appreciate the power of rhetorical tools for what they are, because that's their accomplishment there in my mind. It's like IFS is the accomplishment of TE thinking directed towards psychology. It's looking
Yes.
for actual outcomes, and it's saying it doesn't matter what the TI is on this, really. Because I mean, it's not like it's TI bad. It's just all metaphor. But the point of it is it causes the attention of the individual, whatever that attentional strength or weakness might be. Various attentional strengths will be directed towards the self in ways that empower the individual to use their own tools to solve their problems in ways that allow the self to be independent of its bad behaviors. Because this is another thing that I've noted is that Kimberly doesn't seem to distinguish very clearly between people and behaviors. Like, I keep explaining, look, we should critique each other's behaviors, not each other's person. But
Yes.
she has a tendency
No
to.
name calls, behavioral calls, but no fucking name calling.
Okay, well, and that's something I'm guilty of when I'm really angry is a little bit of name calling.
Do you
But
say being a bitch, being an asshole, or do you say you are? To me, there's a line difference there.
Okay, so I have a long history of always using behavioral critiques and not individual or ontological critiques. Except one mistake I've made in fights with her before is when she gets me extremely angry, I do some name calling, because I think of that as being not an ontological critique. And if I say, like, you lying sack of shit, I don't think of that as being really. I'm not saying I'm accusing you of being a sack of shit.
Not as I do, because I'm right there with you.
But the thing is, I respect the fact that that's not okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kimberly's here now, so I'm gonna stop this video anyway. I was just about to stop it anyway, and maybe we'll chat with you off afterwards as well. All right, thank you for watching. Thanks, Beckie, that you did a spectacular job.